Okay, it's so nice to be here with you all tonight. So again, thanks so much for inviting me over. I'm delighted to sit and chat about wellbeing. It's my favourite thing to talk about. So I hope you've all got like a cup of tea ready, and like Steph said, very informal. I'm happy to answer any questions or chat about any points that you want to raise. So if you just give me a wee minute, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, Steph, I can see you. Can you just let me know if you can see my screen? Is everything okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Yes, fab, thanks. Okay, so being well in education, it's one of these things that it's always been around. You know, for the children, we've always had PSHE programs and such. And at times I feel like staff have kind of been left behind. And now I feel like after COVID particularly, being well in education is something that should encompass everyone, staff, students and parents. So a very simply named presentation, but carries so much because being well means so much in the realm of well-being, but it means so much to everyone. And it's one of the most important things, I believe, in education. So I've got the Twitter hashtag at the bottom there, like Steph said. If you're happy to tweet anything that you hear, that'd be great to keep the conversation going. So just really briefly, a little bit about me. I graduated from Glasgow Uni with the BEd teaching degree 14 years ago, I think it was. Did my probation year in Scotland and did a bit of supply, but back then it was really hard to get kind of permanent work and I was really struggling. So I followed the work and went out to the United Arab Emirates, where I still am just now, teaching full-time in a school in Dubai. But it's the British curriculum, which is kind of a mixture of all. So I've really enjoyed it. I'm in year 3, which is kind of primary 4, worked predominantly in Key Stage 1. Although about 10 years ago, I kind of started to experience my own kind of mental health difficulties, you know, being away from family. And although I was having a great time here, I just felt a shift within myself. So I came across meditation. And it's something that has just followed me now throughout my whole life. It's like a daily part of life. After I started doing meditation, I started learning more about mindfulness. I had total light bulb moments, like why are we not teaching children about all of this in school? Went to India 4 years ago to do my yoga teacher training, learned more about it then. And then straight after that, I decided to start a master's degree in positive psychology and coaching psychology, which is about applying the science of well-being to everyday life. And to me, it's such a fantastic branch of psychology that supports your well-being in so many ways. But I'm going to chat a bit more about that as we go through. So what might you take away from today? I thought about the 5 pieces to the puzzle, really, things that I want to share specifically today. So I know there's lots of leaders here, teachers, there'll be lots of people involved in different areas in education. So I wanted to start off with my research findings about thriving teachers, which was pre-COVID, but still some interesting information there all the same. And also the next part I'd like to think about is in terms of our own well-being, to check in with yourself and move forward. I think so often we're running at 100 miles an hour, spinning so many plates, trying to get everything done, days are packed. How often do we sit and give ourselves time to really check in emotionally and see how we are and why we feel that way? And then again, think about moving forward. I'd like to chat a little bit to you about positive psychology and us. I'm sure many of you are familiar with positive psychology, but I'd love to share a little bit for some who maybe aren't so familiar with it. And then something that's really important to me, a real important piece of the well-being puzzle, is personal care, self-care, and then non-negotiables. Then I'd like to chat a little bit about intentions and takeaways. And then, like Steph said, we'll have the breakout rooms, and I hope you don't mind if I pop in and out some of them. I'd really love to be part of the conversation as well. So research finding about thriving teachers, this was really important to me as part of my master's study because I learned all about this science of wellbeing, and obviously being a full-time teacher, a wellbeing leader for my school, and I thought, you know, when I speak to colleagues, and I've got friends that still teach in Scotland, and often I was hearing the same thing, you know, oh gosh, I'm really tired, I'm struggling, or this has been hard, and out here in Dubai, the governing body once a year issue a wellbeing survey for adults who work in a school. And one of the questions was asking about thriving teachers. So I decided that I wanted to find out what makes these teachers self-report as thriving so that the rest of us can learn some lessons from them. But before I go into the sciencey research, always have a look at social media, because I feel like social media shows us what's happening in real time, what teachers are saying, what leaders are saying within education. And it does give you a real valuable insight into the landscape of what's happening. This one was really kind of stood out to me. This year, talking about COVID, is not an indictment on your teaching career. If you're struggling to feel successful, know that you're not alone and allow yourself grace. There were so many periods last year, the restrictions here, like at home, were quite difficult. Our children are still wearing masks full time in school. They're seated a metre apart. Teaching looked totally different. And at times it could be a struggle to feel successful. And of course that can impact well-being. It can impact staff morale, it can impact the students. But it's important to know that many of us were experiencing similar. This one was important to me as well, because working with children is hard, but that it's hard because it matters. We all know what it feels like to spin the plates and contend with so many things day to day. And in Scotland, I know that many people have got 33 children in their class. So you think about those 33 varying relationships. I read something before that day to day or minute by minute, a teacher makes more decisions than a brain surgeon, because you're working on all those relationships and learning for those children, the relationships with the staff around you. It's just a constant stream of thought and a constant things that are happening. And it is hard, but it does matter. And we're all still here because we care about making a difference for those children, but it shouldn't also be at the detriment of our own well-being. This one again, teachers are not just teaching through a pandemic, they're teaching through their own trauma, loss, anxiety and depression. And teachers do this every single day, pandemic or not. So when you look at the statistics, there's 1 in 4 adults at some point will experience a mental health difficulty at some point in their life. So, when we look around and say there's 50 people here, you think about the numbers that do experience these difficulties, and people still are going day to day, putting their best in for the children and for education, because like the one before it said, it matters. And this one just really made me laugh. So when you're about to scream, but an SLT pops in to check if you're looking after your well-being, it's like sometimes I feel like on social media in particular, well-being can be a word that's bandied about, and it's donuts in the staff room or some wear your own clothes on a Friday. And although those things are momentary, what we need is more in-depth strategic well-being provision for staff in schools and also the students. Mr. P, ICT, really makes me laugh when he talks about these things of well-being, because it is a lot of people's experience, but there is so much good stuff happening as well. It's important to look at it with a solution-focused attitude and what things we can do in this recovery phase and what we can do for everybody moving forward. And for me, that includes a lot of the science, implementing and applying the science well. So when I did my research, I wanted to just show you this little snip paragraph. So Maslow in 1982, and I was thinking to myself, that's 20 years ago. And I'm like, no, it's not, it's 40 years ago. This definition of burnout having 3 dimensions: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a reduction in perceived personal accomplishment, particularly in the context of those who work in human professions, healthcare and teaching. Then again, 2 decades ago, when I wrote this in the year 2000, teacher burnout was seriously problematic for the education system, and the concern is no different today. So I think, gosh, if this was written, that was 2000, what are the papers saying more recently? And of course, there are lots of articles we can look at about this. More recently, this demotivation to continue and emotional stress was again connected to heavy workload. That was 2011. So pupils, schools and authorities then being negatively affected through decreases in job performance. Teachers may search for different work or leave completely, 2001. And then came COVID, so the landscape completely changed. Everyone in education, leaders, teachers, admin staff, everyone we're now dealing with something that looked completely different, that none of us have been trained for. So then to me, I'm like, of course then well-being comes to the front. You know, at times academics have had to be put down for a while to focus on all the social issues, things that children needed devices. There's just been so much. So I just think in education, as everyone has been through so much, so it is time now for the recovery and the well-being focus to take centre stage. When I did the research before, I did interviews with, like I said, teachers that reported as thriving. And if you look at this Wordle, you can see this is the data that came out, and you were able to make a Wordle from the most common words that appeared in the transcripts. So you can see that thriving teachers really, relationships was the biggest thing that came out. The environment, positive, respect, they felt listened to, they felt balanced, reflected, they had great leadership, they had autonomy, had goals. So it's a really lovely Wordle to look at and think, okay, so this does encompass lots of elements of well-being that connected help someone thrive within education. So again, I can send this presentation on if you want a longer look at some of the words that are there. And these are some of the themes that came out. So my 4 master themes were that these teachers in the interviews had kind of intrinsic commonalities. They were aware of their own well-being and self-care, and they prioritised it. They were reflective about situations that might have happened in work, you know, and then spent time thinking about it and then moved forward, and they had kind of solution-focused attitudes. If you think about that, that's something that can be improved or learned. It's not an innate thing. You can increase your solution-focused attitude, I suppose. Another thing was the value of interpersonal relationships. So these teachers were social in and out of the workplace. They valued mutual respect, and each of them talked about how they were given to others, but more in their time, you know, given to the children with their time, helpful to new staff, things like that. Something that was really important was the effects of leadership. And again, I know we'll have many leaders here as well, but they all talked about how their leaders were really empowering, helped them, they were great mentors, but they empowered them to make choices. They had autonomy and things within their role. These leaders were open and approachable. That gave staff a comfort in being able to speak with them and speak honestly. And these leaders fostered equality and equity within their environments. And the working environment was also impactful to these thriving teachers. Something that I was really interested to find out about this was the 3 kind of subordinate themes that came out, that they felt trusted, they felt psychologically safe, and they felt supported. Now, I've worked in a school where I didn't have these 3 things. And I think back to how difficult that was, and now working in an environment where I do feel trusted, I feel psychologically safe and supported, it has made a massive impact on my well-being. So you just think about the extrinsic things that can affect people's well-being within the workplace environment are hugely important, as we all know. And if you're interested in hearing a little bit more, I've just got a QR code, and it's a 20-minute YouTube video where I just chat a bit more depth about the findings that I had. But I do think it's just nice to listen to those things, the words that come from people who do report as thriving. But again, I have to say it's pre-COVID, and it was just about to be published, and then COVID hit, and it wasn't as relevant in terms of the research journal, because I would have had to do more research to add to it then. But with this video, you kind of get the message. So each day, when I get into my desk in the morning, I put my fairy lights on. It's still quite dark when I get there. And the first thing I do is choose a card from my little box. And this is my intention for the day. So this is a card that came up to me, or I pulled out a couple of weeks ago in a really hard week in school. There was just a lot of issues happening in the classroom. Really struggling to get through the week. You know, there's just so much going on, a lot of staff off and issues between the children in the class. And it's the surest way to simplify your life is to focus on what matters most. Sometimes there can be an overwhelm of the amount of things that you need to deal with day to day. Well, I certainly feel that way as a class teacher. And this card just kind of meant a lot at the time, because I thought at the minute, I feel a bit burnt out. I'm tired. struggling, and what matters most is me actually just now and my well-being. So at the end of the week, went home, left the computer, all the work at home, and thought, right, I need to make a plan for next week because I can't run at this capacity because it's not good for my mental health and well-being. So that kind of moves me on to the next piece of the puzzle here. Checking in with yourself and moving forward. So I'd like you to take a little minute, wherever you are, if you've got a bit of pen and paper or a pen, or just even want to sit and think about it. And perhaps it can be, you can add to the chat box here. Have a think about professionally, are you thriving overall, functioning well despite adversity, just getting by, or really struggling? And perhaps we could do, if you're thriving overall, number one could go in the chat box, number 2 for the second, number 3, and so on. You don't have to do that. It's only if you feel that you want to contribute, or if you want to just sit quietly, think for yourself and just check in and think about where you would stand on that scale. And then the same idea personally, what would you say? You know, would you say thriving overall, functioning well despite hardships, adversity, day to day, just getting by? So this is actually the question in the Adults at School Wellbeing survey that happens over here, and some of the teachers that reported as thriving are the ones that then contributed to the interviews for my research. But I think about this question often, you know, and I think about it in work and I think about it at home. And I decide where I am on the scale. And the next thing that I always find is so valuable is then if you consider why. Sometimes we're just running at full capacity, like I said, when you're doing everything at work, at home. Some people have children at home, you've got families, there's so many things to do. You're trying to keep your plants alive, you're trying to cook the dinner, you're trying to hydrate enough, just so many plates to spin. So when you think about these questions, just give yourself that peace and that time to think about, okay, why am I feeling this way? And then, of course, the next step is once you've decided how you feel and you've checked in and where you are on the scale, it's moving forward from that. In an ideal world, we would be thriving, you know, and feeling that way all the time. But of course, we know we're not. And there are times where you are thriving in your environment and everything feels great. But that also doesn't mean to say that you can't continue to thrive and flourish further. And that's kind of where positive psychology comes in. But wherever you are on that scale, think about moving forward. And this is a daily practice of mine that definitely keeps me on a more of an even keel. So making time to check in with myself, and mindfulness is a huge part of this. I don't know how many people practice mindfulness that are in the participants here, but it definitely is a practice that can keep you aware of your day-to-day feelings, checking in, noticing thoughts, and just being completely non-judgmental with yourself when you notice those thoughts. There's actually a really gorgeous poem called The Guest House by Rumi, and it just sums up mindfulness for me and talking about this, checking in with yourself and moving forward. And it basically references all the emotions as guests that come into your house and visit, and you sit with them for a while, no matter which one it is, but when it comes the time, you gently usher them out. So I would encourage you to read that poem. It's gorgeous. So this is definitely mindfulness can support with this, checking in and moving forward. Something else that again pops up in positive psychology quite a lot is journaling in different ways. There's lots of positive psychology interventions that involve writing, but what I decided to do, because I know how good it is for me to almost take everything out and put it down somewhere. So my friend got me a really gorgeous journal from Paper Chase, and I treated myself to a nice new pen, and just each evening before I go to bed I just put everything down on that paper. And I wanted to share something with you that I wrote not so long ago on Tuesday the 25th. During that particularly hard week, I'm just exhausted mentally and physically. You know, and I left this little box blank here because I thought we can all add so many words in there. I am completely exhausted mentally and physically. I'm hugely, terribly, whatever it is. The reason why I wanted to show you this is for me is the power of journaling, because since then, what are we on now, the 10th of February, if I start to feel like I'm burning out a little bit, or doing too much, or checking emails too late at night, or feeling that my well-being is starting to deplete, I actually flick back to this page and I look at it again and I think, okay, so you're not going to go there. So how are you going to move forward? So it's almost like a reference point. And journaling, you can keep track of how you've been feeling if there's patterns coming up, and then you can decide to do something about it. So rather than just trying to remember or going round in a kind of cycle, journaling really helps you. It's like a friend, but it's yourself. And it's just something that I would really recommend to, even if it's one sentence like this. And quite often you can also journal about the joyful things. I had a great day, I met my friend, we laughed until I cried, whatever it is, and it just brings back those feelings and the energy of motion inside when you read them again. So positive psychology and us. So I don't want to talk too long about it. I could talk for an hour about positive psychology, and much to the dismay of my friends whenever we're out and about. There's just so much value in it. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to just chat a little bit about it, explain what it is and how we can use it for ourselves to contribute to our well-being. So in a nutshell, positive psychology focuses on what is right with us. In traditional psychology, there's so much literature and so many articles, so much incredible research. There's also the DSM manual, which is like a diagnostic book. So basically a psychologist, a doctor, clinician can use this book to diagnose difficulties that people are having, disorders or conditions. But the branch of positive psychology, I'd say, kind of emerged around 20 years ago or so, and it really focuses on what's right with us. I was laughing today with the children when we're teaching them about the Stone Age, and when they talk about how the tools that they had, it was like a rock and this, and I'm explaining to the children how much growth has happened. So there is so much right with the humans, look how far we've come in all this time, and you just think there's so much right with us. But again, there's always historically and academically been a focus on the things that can go wrong. And quite often you find counselling services and things are in school, which is fantastic. The capacities are stretched and there's more and more need for it. But for me, I think positive psychology is a way that can introduce anyone, but also staff and students, to preventative measures. There's a lot of things you can do to work on your well-being to strengthen, and it's preventative rather than reactive. So positive psychology, that wasn't in a nutshell, went off in a tangent there. But what is right with us? It's optimal functioning, the science of well-being, and applying positive psychology, which helps us on the mental health continuum towards flourishing. So you might be content and you might feel well and everything seems pretty good, but that doesn't mean to say you can't flourish further. So there's many models and areas of research, including positive psychology in education. Quite often it's referred to positive education, which is quite a term that's got lots of misconceptions attached to it. As people initially can think that it's just, being happy in school and being positive all the time. But now we're learning so much more about toxic positivity. So the field of positive psychology would rather, I think, call it positive psychology in education. One of the most famous kind of frameworks is PERMA. Professor Martin Seligman, who's I think just turned 80 recently, said to be the founding father of positive psychology, came up with this structure through all of his extensive research. And he believes that positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning and accomplishment are 5 areas that, when woven together, help us feel well and are functioning in an optimal level. If you just look at those 5 for a second and consider if you didn't have strong relationships, but everything else was high, you probably wouldn't be at optimal functioning. Or if you weren't experiencing many positive emotions, but you had meaning in life through work or accomplishment, they're all interconnected. You can also do a PERMA survey online, which is great, and you can actually answer the questionnaire and find out which ones are higher and which ones you can work on. So there's so many useful tools out there within positive psychology. So I wanted to just speak to you about 5 of these pathways to enhance well-being. And the reason I've chosen these ones are because these are the ones that I have worked on mostly and that I kind of utilise in my life as a teacher, and we're obviously working within education, but as a person, and the names of them will be completely familiar to you, and there'll be things that you've talked about with friends and family, things you've spoken about with the children, but hopefully I can just speak about these in a little bit more depth in relation to positive psychology and being well within education. And for each one of these also, I could also chat about the same subhead in terms of the children, but I always feel it's so important that anything to do with well-being is introduced and experienced by staff and leaders first, so that they've got this lived experience before it's then brought in for the children. And I definitely think that in any strategic plan for well-being within an educational establishment, school or anything, it needs to start with the adults that work there. Because then, like I said, it's a lived-in experience and it's authentic, and it makes it more accessible for the children when they know that someone's coming from a place of experience, like anything with teaching. So emotions and feelings, I always like to start with this one. To me, emotions and feelings are almost at the centre. They're at the core of who we are. They help us navigate the whole world around us. Everything in work is connected to how you feel and your emotions that pop up throughout the day. This book, Emotional Agility, by Susan David, is a fantastic book. So if you were ever thinking about where to start learning a bit more about the science, this book, I would highly recommend it. So it's being aware and regulating our feelings and emotions. And we know that we're always asking the children to do that. We're asking the children to pay attention. We're asking them to be more calm or, raise their energy for certain activities, whatever it is. But helping the students, and I'm talking about the kids again, but helping the students do that is then their experience of your teaching in that area is improved the more that you obviously do this and practice it yourself. Sometimes I think back to situations that have happened, when we open the door, sometimes you might get an angry parent coming at you and you get that panic feeling or, stress, cortisol goes through your brain and it's like fight or flight. And I just think, again, to me, the clearest vision for me regulating that is taking deep breaths and bringing myself down again and recognising the emotion and almost trying to shift it into emotion that will help me deal with the situation better. And so when we regulate our feelings and emotions and we're really aware of them, also through mindfulness, can lead to improved communication, improved relationships and overall well-being. So again, there's lots of scientific articles and things about this, but this book is like a compact it's not even a whistle-stop tour because it's got so much in it, but it really, again, you'll notice in the blurb there, there's talking about thriving in work and life. It also helps us understand that there's power in negative emotions. Quite often, I know I've done this myself many a time, when you can feel the negative emotion that you're experiencing inside and you try and squash it and ignore it. And again, it comes out in different ways. For some people, it's anger. For some people, it's upset or being short with someone. But there's actually power in negative emotions. Also, the fact that you can't experience true joy and true light without knowing what it feels like to feel sad or down. So it's definitely a great area to do some focused activities on, do some readings on. It's always the best place for me to start emotions and feelings. Again, going back to the pink part of the puzzle, it just helps us check in with ourselves. And being really aware of what emotional landscape is happening inside. Character strength is a joy of mine. I know I sound really geeky about it. I could speak to you for hours about character strengths. Some say that character strengths are kind of the beating heart of positive psychology because, again, it's like a categorization of what's right with us. So there was a massive, I don't know how familiar you are with them, but I'd like to just mention really quickly, there was like a big 3-year scientific study. There was over 60 scientists involved. They went and visited people all over the world. They did so much extensive research and basically found this categorization of 24 character strengths, which were then categorized into 6 virtues. So they're words that you're really familiar with, like humility, leadership, love. And this book is a fantastic resource for just an introduction to them and understanding how you can use your character strengths day to day. We did a big character strengths introduction in our school, I think it was 2 years ago, training for 350 staff. And the idea was everyone learned about their own character strengths. So you can go to viacharacter.org and do your own character strength survey, which is free, and it puts them in order for you. So my top strength is appreciation of beauty and excellence, and my lowest strength at number 24 was self-regulation, which I was really surprised about, because I'm like, I meditate all the time, but I think it was more to do with regulating habits like diet and exercise for me. So your top 5 character strengths are mostly correlated with who you are at the core. But what's fascinating about them is how you can overuse them or underuse them, how you can use them to enhance your situation. There are so many papers about different scientific research into how they can make you feel well. So in our school, when we did the big staff training, we put some case studies on there, and it was day-to-day things like, so for example, if you were a leader and you have someone in your department who isn't meeting deadlines or seems upset, but their top character strengths are humour, love, and your top character strengths might be kindness. So it really gets you into that dialogue of, well, how can you use or suggest ways for their character strengths to shine? How can they use their character strengths to support their own well-being within that situation? How can you turn your character strengths to help that person? And again, you think back to PERMA, that's relationships, gives each person meaning and accomplishment. So character strengths are just amazing. So if you look at their website, all the papers, everything's there, everything's free. You can also actually use character strengths as a staff, which is what we did, and within the departments we knew each other's top strengths and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a great one, and the papers that talk about different connections to well-being. There was also an important study done a few years back by Ryan Nemec, who's this person here, and it was people who used the same character strength in a different way every day for a week. They improved symptoms of clinical depression, so of course, like any study, it's not the same for every person, but in that particular research sample, this is what they found. So if you just think about the gravity behind that, how a lot of these things can support well-being. Gratitude is another one. Now, we know so much about this word, and many of us are grateful in so many different ways. We teach the children to be grateful, and quite often I've put here, it's much deeper than the commercial aspects. You pop into Tesco and you can get a gratitude journal on the shelf for $2.99, and it's great because it's putting that idea in our mind and thinking about ways to do that and giving us that reminder. But it's the most robustly researched concept in positive psychology. So even back in 2001, there's just different interventions that you can do, and they talk about how you practice gratitude and specific interventions, how it can improve your overall subjective well-being. So again, it's something that you can do as a staff, it's something you can do personally, and also when doing what works for you. So if you're writing down 3 things you're grateful for every morning, then you can do it up to a point, but then it might become meaningless, so then you can find different ways to express the gratitude if it doesn't have as much value for you after a while. So it might plateau if you continue to do one gratitude intervention, and although you feel the benefits, it might plateau. So there are other things you can do again to strengthen it. One particular one that I've really enjoyed doing is before it's just writing a gratitude letter, and then you can give it to that person, and the feeling of well-being that you have for yourself and for them, it does linger for a long time. So it's definitely one that I would always suggest. And when I was in India before, I did that, write 3 things I was grateful for every morning. But what I started to realise was that there was actually so many connections with mindfulness. The more mindfully aware I became, the more things I noticed to be grateful for, and vice versa. So it's definitely something, when you have a look at the science and how this can easily be threaded through school. It can easily be threaded through a staff. It can easily be shared and suggested, or little meetups or groups or something within the community. And it is just, it initially can sound, flowery and like a tick box or tokenistic, but actually there's a huge amount of heavily weighted science behind gratitude and the power of positive emotions, and increased well-being. How am I doing for time? Okay, this is another one. Again, I have to say that I love them all because I do. Creative well-being is something that I really am passionate about. This little card that you can see is a pack of cards that I made, and they're all, again, there's like 6 areas, so like mindset, optimism, mindfulness, things like the emotions, and there's different activities in each one. So often we ask children to use their imagination and do something in art and be creative. Very often I see on Instagram and different things, like in terms of creativity, children will all make the same thing as the person next to them, and many kids are given templates to colour in, and we want them to be creative. These children are going to be, the creators of the future. But when you think back to yourself, I'm sure there's people that use their strength of creativity often within the participants here. But when I did the character strength survey, creativity came at like number 12 or something, and I was really surprised about it. But the more I sat and thought about it, and the more I checked in and reflected, I thought, but not really giving yourself a creative outlet. And I know that being creative helps me feel well. It gets me in the state of flow, where all time disappears. And it's that, again, is another part of positive psychology. There's a lot of data about flow, which I'm sure you can check out. But being creative does help me feel well. So how often as adults must we reignite that sense of play and flow? And I'm actually flying home to Scotland on Saturday, and I'm going to see my little niece who's only just turned 1. And even just looking at her, she's just constantly in this place of wanting to play and have fun. And it brings that side out in me. So I think as teachers and leaders and people within education, giving ourselves space to play and enjoy and do something creative helps you feel well. Many of us will know about community offerings of art therapy and drama clubs and things that we recommend to parents and children. But, what about your own well-being, finding your own space for creativity? Also, the other thing I hear so many people say is, yeah, but I can't draw. And I'm like, says who? You're the only one that's saying that to you. So when I think back to this, draw a picture of you living your best life in the future, that's actually a positive psychology intervention. It's a 3-day intervention, and you do some creative writing, and it boosts with thinking about yourself 10 years in the future, as if all your dreams have come true. And again, when measured, that your well-being boosts when you do that. So just turning that to a creative spin, draw a picture of yourself living your best life. Get the Sharpies out and a blank piece of paper, and just see how you feel after it. You don't even need to measure it, So I think creative well-being is a huge part of feeling well, and we are always short on time. Time is always tight, but even if you just gave yourself, imagine 10 minutes a day, and you add to something 10 minutes a day, it might be for you that you enjoy singing, composing music, painting, dancing, whatever it might be. But just I do encourage you to, even like we talked about before with the journaling, you could journal how you felt before and journal how you felt after it, and then compare the difference. I think this is the last one in this part. Yep, so mindfulness and meditation, again, I could speak about this for hours, but these are probably some of the first books that I ever came across when it came to mindfulness and meditation. A Sane New World by Ruby Wax, and it's brilliant. She was struggling with depression, decided that she wanted to go and find out what was going on with her brain, started a master's in Oxford University. It was a master's in specifically mindfulness. And she just tells her story in such a hilarious way, as Ruby Wax would. But again, she's got so many great books following on from that that just make complete sense, and they turn the science into a way that can be completely understood. She talks a lot about the neuroplasticity and how we can rewire pathways using mindfulness and meditation. So just some benefits here and things that mindfulness can reduce. So research suggests mindfulness can reduce stress, anxiety, depression, anger, addiction, some mental illnesses, and catastrophizing. For me, catastrophizing, it definitely helped me reduce that. I used to be terrible for that. You know, if I got my reports back with edits on them, my mind would just go into meltdown. It would be, oh gosh, they think I can't write reports, I'm going to lose my job in Dubai, I'll have to move home. You know, it's just catastrophizing. But the more I practiced mindfulness, I could see those thoughts for what they were and helped me reduce. And of course, that leaves you more space for wellness and feeling content and balanced. Research suggests mindfulness improves empathy and compassion, trust, relationships, decision-making, meaning, performance and attention, positive emotions. So, you know, they're tall orders, there's huge things in there. And again, this all takes time, but it's just those little pockets of time each day that you dedicate to your own wellness, despite all the hard things that are happening day to day. Again, like we talked about, it's kind of putting yourself first. And we've all heard that phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup, or put your oxygen mask on first before helping other people. So it's very similar. So personal care, self-care and non-negotiables. Again, I do love a nosy on Instagram and Twitter and everything. And, you know, you see loads of it, hashtag self-care Sunday. And it's great, you know, it's becoming this real topic of conversation. But I think it's also really important to distinguish between these three things. So I'd like to give you just a minute or two just to consider these things. If you've got a pen and paper, you can write them down, or you don't need to share them. It's just for yourself. Think about a few minutes to write down what personal care is for you, what self-care looks like, and then what would a non-negotiable in your life be. I did have some nice music to play, but it's gone. And then you can start to think about, what does each of these look like in your life? And if you want, you can just take a picture of this slide to do it later. And the third part of this little exercise is, without any judgment, reflect on how often you currently make time and space for each. So I would say that week that I referred to kind of towards the end of January there was no self-care, you know, even to the point I wasn't cooking myself nutritious food. I was phoning, you know, takeaways in and just eating rubbish. And ironically, there's actually a Scottish chip shop across the road in my street in the middle of Dubai. You know, so I had too many portions of chips that week. And again, I knew when I was doing it, I'm not looking after myself, but I'm just so tired. So to me, when I reflect on that now, I'm not judging myself for it. It's the best I could do at the time. So I just want to kind of share with you what my feelings about these things are. So I made a distinguish between personal care and self-care. There are things that are personal care that you do, you know, that are day-to-day, like have a bath and sleep, healthy meals throughout the week, make sure I'm hydrating properly, and caring for my skin. So it's lovely to go and get a facial, and that is definitely caring for yourself. Or it's lovely to even, you know, take your makeup off and, you know, put your moisturiser on. Even might feel like a win sometimes, but that's personal care. And then for me, I wanted to think about self-care as more deeper. I wanted to think of it as a deeper thing for myself. So making time for my meditation daily, because I know how much that impacts me if I don't keep up a solid practice. I know that if I make time for meditation, I just feel clearer, I feel well. So for me, that's one that I definitely, to care for myself mentally and physically, is giving myself that space. I plan time into my diary for life admin, when you've got to pay the bills, or I actually have a big timetable on my wall, and I'll write things in like pay the insurance, or because it helps me feel again balanced and well and content and on an even keel when I feel on top of those things. Because I live myself over here in Dubai, when it was during lockdown and I really experienced, I'd say, deep loneliness at some points. So I've realised that now things are much better. To care for myself, I need to make space for connection. If I don't have a social connection every couple of days, then I can feel myself start to dip. So I know that that's a self-care priority for me. And also treating myself as I do others. Like I said before, very often in school, definitely leaders, definitely teachers, you do what you can for everyone around you, and you don't often hold yourself in the same regard. So that to me is what self-care looks like. So then I made a little list of non-negotiables: meditation, no emails or school past 5. My coach recently said you have to put some boundaries in. That week I was given 100% to each day, and she said sometimes it needs to be 85% and keep 15 for yourself. And another thing was carving out time to nurture my own business out with school. So I'm coming to the end. I hope I haven't talked at you too much. I just want to share this card. This is one of my character strength cards. So I've got photographs and put all the strengths on it, and they're used in schools here. And it's just like a great visual. When I saw this little plant in the middle of the desert, like pushing through all this hardship, and I thought, gosh, that is what happens in school. No matter what comes at you, you just keep going. But what's really important is to grow. And I think well-being is such a huge thing for growth personally and professionally. So I just think perseverance, and that's what we have been doing for so long, particularly through COVID. So I think this little visual was a great starting point to think about, okay, so how am I going to flourish now? How am I going to thrive? So if you want to just take a little picture of this slide even, just take a moment to think of an intention that you'd like to set for yourself for the next month. Consider what resonated with you most from this session, and what can you do to start moving forward tomorrow. What thing can you do to improve your well-being? And I know that, Steph, in a moment we're going to have some structured networking time where there's 3 questions that are kind of based around this intention and takeaway. And just to finish, I've wanted to just share my socials with you. I want to connect with you, chat with you, hear how wellbeing's going in Scotland within education, within leader groups. I'd love to learn more from you. And also, I hope you don't mind, I've got a QR code here because I have an online course, and each module is based on the themes that we've talked about today, like gratitude and creative well-being, emotions. And it's just something that I put together because I just find this so important and I want to share it with everyone. But also within the online course, there's a module for adults, like I said, but then there's a module for children within the same theme. And these are my 2 children's books, The Emobeans and the Feelings, and The Emobeans and the Character Strengths, that you can use as resources once you've worked on your own character strengths and stuff first. So that's me, and thank you so much for listening to me. I hope I haven't rattled on too much.
Not at all, Ashley, thank you so much.